the pledge, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, I'll do the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
We have people who are for our assessing service interviewed with a company, and I'll turn it over to Karen, who's put this together for us.
Okay. Thank you for coming. The town received 4 proposals for assessing contractor. One of them is our existing contractor whose contract expires in a couple of days. And so the board decided it was important to go out to bid for the thing. We've gotten some excellent proposals. The board had scheduled 2 interviews for today. The low bid was the first interview scheduled, which canceled due to the weather. So it'll be up to the board whether they want to reschedule that. They're going to interview you, and then they'll take it under advisement on whether or not they want to bring in others to talk to.
Okay.
But we do have all the proposals. What I'd like to do is have you do a brief presentation on how MRI handles assessing for various towns. We have a couple of questions to ask, and then I'll open it to the board to see if they have any questions.
Okay, great. I'll just give a brief intro. So my name is Alan Gould, I'm president of MRI. I've been with the firm going on 11 years now. I live in Rye, so I'm very local. Ed is with me. Ed's a career assessor. I have to confess that I'm not an assessor. You know, I'm president of the company, so I kind of oversee everything, but assessing is not my specialty. The person would normally be here, our business manager, was in Lincoln this morning, and he's still in Lincoln. so
That I can understand.
When he said he was trying to get to Newington, I said, why don't you just let me cover that?
Yeah.
You know.
Let him continue skiing.
No, I wasn't when he was going.
Nice call,
Yeah,
Tim.
he was
Nice
working.
call, Tim.
Yeah, I like that. And you know, I'll just say about our assessing department is we do a lot of assessing. We do, I think, more than 20 towns at this point. We kind of have you surrounded. We do Exeter, Rye, Northampton, Kittery, Lee, Epping, Newmarket. So those are the ones in the Seacoast region. We know it really well. We know that you have kind of a unique balance of commercial, industrial versus residential, and I think that we're really good at doing that. That's one of the things that's a strength that Ed brings to our team. I think we have 10 full-time assessors and 2 part-time people that work for us. If we were awarded the contract, Ed would be assigned as your lead assessor, and I think that towns think of us as their assessors, and that's the way we like it. The other thing I can tell you from personal experience is that, you know, the numbers are the numbers. It's a calculation, and we got to make sure that the input is done correctly, of course. But then it comes down to the appeals, and it comes down to the abatements. And you know, we took over the assessing in Rye, where I happen to own 2 houses. Well, I guess 3 years ago. So I got the entourage of people at the transfer station that connected me with the company, and so they'd say, do you know what my assessment went up to? And I'd say, no, and they'd tell me the number, and I said, would you sell me your house for that? Oh, no. So I'd say, listen, I'm just joking, but make an appointment to talk to one of the assessors. I did the same, because I didn't actually know Ed at the time, because I wasn't doing the hiring for our assessing. And he had to go in and explain to me why my taxes were what they were. And everybody that's ever come to me to complain about taxes, I've said, talk to Ed or Paul or Scott, and I've said, get back to me when you're done talking to them and let me know how you feel. Everybody has come back to me and said they understand, they agree, and that was the end of it. And they really appreciate the professionalism of our assessing team. So for me, like I said, numbers are one thing, it's the way you deal with these people that's critically important. And I think you can talk about Hampton that was just done. What do you have, 17, how many appeals are?
Well, right now, just 17 abatements. So we
Yeah.
did a reval this year in Hampton. We did 6 revals last year. We have 6 scheduled for this year. So one of the big things, and I was actually the Hampton assessor for 9 years before leaving here.
Sure.
Yeah, so they ended up hiring us to continue, and I'm the lead there. I've been still there, so I didn't get away. I tried to get away. I think the big thing with us is because of the amount of revals we do, we have a lot of data that we accumulate to gather for valuation purposes, commercial especially. So we're looking at values constantly, sales and market rates and cap rates and, I&Es and all that stuff. So we're constantly doing that, which is, I think it's a big help in keeping the abatements and the appeals down, having so much current data to utilize. But again, we're in 21 towns, we do everything associated with the assessing practice for current use, land use change tax, gravel penalties. I mean, we do everything that the town would need. So I think with the experience, but also the amount of revals and the staff we have a lot of staff which has a lot of experience in all of those as well. So it's not one or two people that have all the experience with, field people working behind us. There's several that have experience doing, all of the facets of assessment.
And half of you are assessing supervisors.
Yeah.
So half our staff is
Five,
assessing
six.
So you
supervisors.
got 10 and how many part-time?
2.
Yeah, 10. Of the 10, I think Paul, myself, Scott, there may be 4 to 5 supervisors.
So we don't bottom load it. A lot of places bottom load listers and measurers, because that's cheap labor, that's cheaper labor. We don't do that. And many of our people have been with us much longer than I have. I've been there 10 years. And Joe, Scott, well, there's a bunch of them have been there
Yeah, and we
20, 30 years.
Yeah, we have the ability to talk between ourselves to come up with the best resolution when we're dealing with, complex issues, so.
And just to explain what that is, a DRA requires various levels of training for the levels of certification. So you can be a DRA certified measure lister, assistant, or assessing supervisor level. And so in our RFP, we required at least a supervisor and assistant level.
Absolutely.
Not to have just a measure lister.
Right.
Because sometimes it's work that needs to be done in a table or something that the measure lister isn't certified to actually
Correct.
do.
I was a
So,
certified general, so I know what you're saying.
yeah, so we're requiring the top 2.
Good, okay, I was gonna ask that question, but she's ahead of me as usual.
And that's our specialty. A lot of times we bid against companies that just run heavy on the lister measure, kind of that entry level.
Yeah.
And, we can't compete with those prices because we do have a lot more face time with our certified assessing supervisors. And to me, that's kind of what sets us apart from a lot of other firms.
Yeah, we also have some field people that are versed in measuring commercial properties. Actually used to work for Vision down in Massachusetts and Connecticut, doing,
So you're familiar with vision?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
That was one of my questions.
Yeah,
That's most of what we deal with.
Yeah, most of our towns
I
are.
was gonna say, most
Vision
towns
8.
you mentioned the vision.
Yeah, Vision 8 just came out, so we've got
Yeah.
that running in a few
Good.
towns.
Okay.
We're up on that one as well.
We just completed the reval.
Okay, so Newington just recently changed from the archaic Universe assessing software to Vision 8. So there are still some transition issues being worked out. Can you tell us anything about your experience with conversions?
I've assisted in Hampton's conversion. Exeter is getting ready to convert. We just started that whole process with Vision remotely. We've discussed all of the steps. We have the schedule lined up to complete that process next month. Kittery just recently converted. Wyndham recently, Paul McKinney was involved in that one. So yeah.
How about Durham? Derry Gomez, is he still involved over there?
No, Derry, he's retired.
Yeah, we don't do.
We don't do dairy, but I believe they contract out, but I'm not sure.
We did the reval in Durham a couple of years ago.
Durham, we did.
Yeah, okay.
But everyone this year is gonna probably be going to Vision 8. they just had an update, actually,
Right, we have Vision 8,
8.1,
yes.
they did the 8.1 update for you. You have to schedule it, it's a,
That I'm not sure, because
okay. It's okay.
Vision 8 was just installed in September.
Yeah.
Um,
There's an update now, but if you
yeah,
call
the
and
reval
schedule-
was done
right.
with Universe, put into Vision.
The conversion, yeah.
The conversion and the transfer of the Vision, to BMSI for the tax program was
Okay.
done manually.
We knew it would be time consuming, but we knew it was the only way it could be done right.
So how did conversion go from Vision, from Universe to Vision, were there many
Karen
errors?
can answer that.
There weren't a lot of errors, what Vision had to do, fortunately, because there's not a lot of parcels.
Oh, okay,
yeah.
understood, yeah.
It's not a lot of parcels, so
Mhm.
Vision actually did the conversion they did all the data entry
Oh,
at
good.
Vision manually.
Yeah,
Um,
and because of the amount of.
Yeah, because you're only talking, how many parcels, like
300
300 total?
Roughly around 300.
300 improved.
No, that's improved and vacant,
Oh, total
that's
300.
total,
Oh, okay. I was
total.
thinking
760
500.
people in town, that's all.
Okay.
So it's little, so they did it all manually. And
Yeah.
so then the Universe numbers were matched up with the Vision numbers, manually again. The company just like,
You know, that's
did
good.
card
Yeah,
by
if you
card.
can do it, yeah, that's great,
but we're still working on some of Vision's reporting
right,
to be able to get all those tables ready, but,
Yep.
okay, but we're working on that.
okay.
Newington contracts with George Sansucci to do all of the utility work.
Okay, yep.
And Newington also has a couple of unique industrial properties that are energy related.
Okay.
One being Sprague Energy, which is a tank farm,
Mm-hmm.
and C3, which is a propane depot.
Yeah, okay.
So they're not technically utilities, but they're in that energy field.
Sure,
So Mr. Sansucci's firm does the buildings on those properties, but not the land. So
okay.
this contractor would be responsible for valuing the land.
Okay, sure. Yep.
So experience with valuing really unique land parcels, like a mall's land. I mean, we have unique
No, I know
properties.
you've got that, you know, in Hampton, we've got the Seabrook Power Plant, we have to, pieces of that, because only a certain amount of that comes through town. It's actually the tunnels that go under the Hampton River.
Excuse me.
So we do value those. We've got aquarium, we've got 5 or 6 utilities that run throughout the town. We deal with the right of ways, we do those values in-house. So familiar with those things. We now recently had the sale of the railroad, the Pan Am to the state.
Mhm.
Pan Am actually reserved a utility right away on the property, under the property, which actually houses a lot of utility right of ways currently. We've got the list in Hampton. So I've just created a value relative to that land area and the utilities, value relative to those easements underneath or along that right of way. So, you know, I think also you've got, like we said, we've got other assessors that have dealt with things.
But I mean, you've got Epping is heavily commercial. You've got a lot of commercial in Exeter. Kittery's very
Kittery was an
commercial.
aspect.
So, you know, all communities are unique, but it's because we've been in so many of these communities, when you put the pieces together, that's kind of how we're able to help you, is because we've done it in all these different places. Believe me, there's no other Newington in the state of New Hampshire. Because we work in almost every town we do something, yeah. It's very unique.
So it could be a challenge a little bit, that's why we're concerned.
Yeah.
Right, and I think it's the only tank farm in the state
Sure.
anyway, so
Yeah.
it's the tanks that's.
I would say, I think we can handle that for you. I'm
Okay.
confident we can, so.
And the only other question I had through the RFP was on your mileage charge.
Yes.
Is that travel to Newington or only mileage charge within Newington while you're actually?
It would be
doing
within-
pickups.
Well, typically it would be within,
It's
I believe.
travel within the town,
Within the town.
doing your
Okay.
work.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, that was just a clarification.
I got a question, if I
Yeah.
may. Have you done any work with waterfront type of things? Because we are 80% waterfront in New Hampshire, it all comes in here.
Hampton,
Hampton,
I know you probably know
Hampton,
Gino, so I
Kittery.
figured you guys know my brother anyway, but that's what our concern is here. Is that we want to keep this commercial, that's a good venue for us.
Sure.
And where 80% of the stuff comes in from the state comes through here. 18 foreign countries to be
Sure.
exact, so we're concerned about make sure the values of this, we can get what we feel is fair.
Right. And I mean, that's the same thing, I mean, you look at our list, and it's all seacoast communities that we've
Yes.
highlighted.
Right.
So when it comes to the uniqueness of the waterfront, I think we've got that covered better than anybody else.
Yeah, actually, I completed, I think it's 3 revals in Hampton since I started there back in '09.
Okay.
Just completed one this year, so pretty familiar with a lot of.
Well, the young lady used to be down there, she lived in Seabrook, she was assessor.
Oh,
Angie.
Yeah,
Angie.
she's in Seabrook.
We
She's
run
still
into, that's all I
assessing.
said, hi, she was
Yeah.
very helpful when I was involved in Hampton, when we used to go the paper trail, not all the computer,
Yeah.
but paper trails.
And she's such a good example of somebody that went all the way up.
And Ben knows.
When I started in '90 in Hampton, she came in
You knew
just,
Angie, okay,
she was a data entry
oh, okay.
and worked under Bob Estee, who was
Yes, Bob
one of the
Evans.
best, and he mentored her all the way up to
He
becoming
did an
assessor.
excellent job with her, really did,
He
she's
did.
really a smart lady, I like her,
Yeah, yeah.
that's all I said,
I mean,
thank you.
Well, when we hired Ed, he was in high school. We just kept sending him.
Well, that's good, that is good.
I've got a couple of questions. If we were to ask you, how good are you, or what's your track record on meeting deadlines?
I don't know that we missed the deadline.
I don't think we have.
It's funny, I was just telling him on the way over, that I run on Lombardi time. And that means if you're not 15 minutes early, you're late. And, that's what I like to impart on all of our people, really, is, you gotta be on time.
Now, if we spoke to the towns that you work with, we'd hear the same thing from the town?
Absolutely, we hope that you would call some of those towns.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and these are, when you look at these towns, many of them have really high standards, much like you will. And, the Northamptons, the Exeters, those are places that have pretty high standards, and they've got, some very affluent, residents and whatnot that hold to those standards, so deadline standards, not a problem for us.
And also we have statutory deadlines that we have to.
Right, yeah.
So we never, not,
Last year, we became very familiar with that.
Yes,
okay.
because they did not meet the deadline,
Oh.
so.
That's what our concern was.
Now, if we were to go and speak with the communities that you work with now,
Sure.
what's important, I think, certainly for me, is the intercommunications. Because you can have some residents come in, as you know, that are very upset. They have very complex or very simple questions. But I think the key is how you interact with them.
Yeah.
How would the towns, if we will do some checking, but how do you think they'd respond when we ask them that question?
I think that's our absolute strength. That's why I talked about that early on, is that these gentlemen, are so polished when they're dealing with people, both on the outside and on the inside. Now, Rye is a place where I stop into town hall fairly frequently, because I still do certain things for the town there. And that's always my question, is I'll talk to the assessing clerk and say, how we doing? Because I just want that feedback. And we work in so many towns, so all the towns you'll see on our client list, we do other work there. If we're not, and that's typically when I get involved, we're doing finance, we're doing recruitments, we're doing, investigations. So we're not gonna let one side of the company drag down any, the other part. So we make sure that everybody's just on top of it. And I think communications both internally and with because, it's the residents that are gonna make the most noise. And I think that that's where we excel.
One last one I had is too, if we had an emergency, what's your response time that we could plan on?
Well, you live about 5 minutes away.
I'm right in Green, right on Post Road. in Green.
So if we had an issue, we could certainly see someone from your company that day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm focused, I mainly am gonna be on the seacoast during the week, so I won't be that far from here at any time during the week.
There've been, I can only think of 2 instances in my 10 years at MRI where a manager has ever called me and said, hey, we'd like to talk to you about this problem. And I was there the next day, and that was the end of it. So and that's why I'm here today. Again, typically I don't do this, but we wanted to be responsive. It's New England, and we drive in the snow. So here we are. Yeah, it's just it.
Thank you.
Very welcome.
I don't have any questions, I've done a little inquiry, and you guys come out very high.
Good, thank you.
Appreciate it.
I've got another question if I may. About how many court cases have you guys been involved with and how's the results of those?
Do you know that specifically?
Well, I mean, I can't give you, I don't think I can give specific numbers. I
Okay.
know that in Hampton, I mean, I think we've done pretty well over the years. I've been there 9 years. They do have in-house counsel.
Yes, I know.
Mark Giroux, yeah. So I've worked closely with him.
Okay.
We've handled, you know.
So,
over the 9 years.
And Joe Lasai was one of the founders of the company 30 years ago.
Okay.
Joe is an assessor.
Yeah.
And he's still involved with MRI assessing. He's taken a
Where
step
was the
back.
assessing?
I'm sorry?
Where was the assessing?
He started in Salem.
Okay, I must know you. 'cause
He's
I
on
know-
the, he's on the ASB, so
Oh,
he's on
okay.
the ASB.
I know who he
So
is.
he's like the highest level you can be. He's, you know, of the handful of most highly regarded assessors in the state, Joe is one of them.
Mhm.
So when you talk about lawsuits or
Mhm.
having to go up to the state for appeals, that's Joe. That's generally, when we kick it
Yeah,
out.
I mean, I think what we do is we analyze what the issue is
Mhm.
and try to deal with it, how it should be dealt with.
Okay,
To save you money,
Yeah,
the town.
yeah, that's what
Right,
we're
so we
looking
don't
to do.
wanna go or give them just to get rid of them, we wanna do the right thing.
Okay,
Sometimes you ultimately have to go and,
Yep.
Yeah, I
I think
can't-
we've done pretty well over the years, but.
I can't think of one that comes to mind.
how you, are you dealing all with Salem at this point?
In assessing, no,
Okay,
but in other things,
because
yes.
I know the old racetrack, he was a racing commissioner over there for many years, Denny West.
Oh, okay.
I know you got quite a bit of development going on there, I'm sure that must be a nightmare for a few.
Oh, if you've been over there, it's amazing. I mean, I was on the police department there for 21 years. And to go over there now and see the racetrack, I was a resident of
Now I
Greenwood.
recognize you,
I mean-
now I saw you. No.
You were like this, right?
Yeah.
Everything wasn't he should have been.
In 1981, I lived in Greenland for 2 months, right there. I mean, in Newington, right there.
Really?
That's where the police academy was.
Oh,
yeah.
In the
Yeah.
fall.
Oh, yeah.
So I did a lot of push-ups on the tarmac over there.
Did you work for Gannon?
No,
Was
Gilly,
he?
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. He was the chief that hired me. And I
Okay.
left in 2001 to take the chief's job in Rye.
Well, I'm all set, thank you.
I am also.
Ryan, any other questions, Ryan?
All set?
Do you have any questions of
For
us?
Would I? You know, I'd just like to say we'd love the opportunity to do this. We really, we really have a nice focus on the seacoast, and we're very proud of that. And, you know, we're seacoast people, a lot of our folks are from the area right here, and we'd like to continue that by adding Newington to the list.
In commercial, I think we do a really good job with the
Yeah,
commercial.
so that's not a big concern.
Yeah.
Well,
We look forward
they're
to
doing
it.
Kittery, they get all Kittery malls.
Exactly,
Yeah,
that's what, when he said that, I
Yeah,
think
that's,
it was me,
So I
yes.
would, yeah, I'd like the opportunity, if it hopefully arises, to.
And speaking of waterfront, they're familiar with waterfront because the Isles of Shoals belongs to Rye, so they're crazy.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
know all about that. I know all about that.
Exactly.
I used to fish out there, I know all about that, all of the shoals.
Yeah, you gotta take a boat to get there, but, we have an MRI jet ski.
You say you have a consulting business as well as this business, is that what you said?
Well, MRI does, much more than just assessing.
Okay,
So we do, if you needed an interim finance person, if you needed to hire a town administrator, any position that anything that a town.
We're not
town or
looking for
city
one.
does. No,
Let's
I know.
make that clear.
I know. Anything a town or city does, we can do. So when you mentioned Salem,
mhm,
one of my employees has been the administrative police chief there since the other chief left, so it's been a year. That we've been running the police department, trying to kind of straighten that out. So, you know, and we do work all over New England. So, you know, people think of us as kind of New Hampshire, and they think of us as, you know, assessing, if that's how they know us. We do internal investigations, we do assessment centers, whatever it is a town does. We just developed our own finance software, for towns that are under like 10,000 in population,
mhm,
to get them out of BMSI.
yep, Okay.
That's going over really well.
all right, good,
So anyway, so that's what we do.
That's right, that's
And we do a
right.
lot in Mass and Rhode Island.
thank you for that.
All
sir, I
the New England
appreciate it.
states.
Yeah,
I'm all-
when I left Greenland, Martha called me like first, and then Alan called me almost immediately after saying, would you work for us
Yeah.
and fill in?
We won.
But Martha liked
Yes,
it.
she did. You got to her first. You know, I try not to pick the blows, cause I was doing the hiring process there as well.
Oh.
So I have to be a little careful about, you know,
Yeah.
finishing one without starting, so we waited till that got over.
And it was too late.
Yeah,
It was in the
too late.
paper and Martha called me that day and said, can we do lunch?
Yeah. Oh, it was you, Martha.
It was.
She's
Now you
Steve, you
know.
gotta watch it.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you coming today.
Absolutely,
Let us
gentlemen.
review this, take it under advisement, you'll be hearing from us.
Great, we appreciate
Nice
it.
to see you
We
again.
appreciate you dragging yourself.
Nice
in.
to meet you.
Nice to see you, thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Good to see you.
Alan, good
Nice
to
to
see you,
meet
thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Pleasure.
Absolutely.
Good to see you, Karen.
You too.
Martha.
Thanks a
We'll
lot.
be in touch.
Nice to have someone in the office.
And you.
Today makes 17 years.
Really?
I know. How's it going? I can say.
Just think Rich is down there in Florida.
Yeah. Move we accept the minutes.
What's he doing?
Yeah. For discussion, all in favor?
His son's still here though.
Yeah. Approve the manifest for $1,376,792.08 dated December 17th, $59,176.67 dated 1/12/24/19.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Facility request, Heather Gerasi Cole, Old Town Hall, January 18th.
Move to accept.
I'll second that.
Discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Citizen services we did, old business. Anything, the ramp?
That'll do it.
What we'll do with the assessors is, we'll go back, we'll look and see, maybe do an interview on the phone with the other, we're familiar with one of the companies who's been assessing here, so try to get this out, review it and get back, we'll have a meeting on it,
Will
sure,
do.
okay?
I would like to check on some of the references, if you could contact several of the towns. And like I said, I think personally, the most important thing is how do they work with people?
Right.
When people have an issue, they want an answer, and I'd like to know what the
I'll get a
towns.
little feedback on
Yeah.
that, I'll talk to a couple, they seem to be very high on. Well, there's one other thing we're gonna bring up on the new businesses, that Bruce Johnson and Lydia Lane, was recommended we put on the bike,
Thank you.
the bike path lane, I would entertain a motion, we
So moved.
I'll second that.
discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Do we, you wanna accept the resignation?
Yes, I thought we did, I'm
So-
sorry, Mike.
With regrets.
Yes, absolutely, with regret.
Nothing else, I think a motion to adjourn is enough.
Could you tell us who's resigning? Sorry.
Beg your pardon?
Could you tell us who is resigning?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Sandra Devons.
Okay, thank you.
They're
No,
moving
it's
out,
okay.
she's moving out of town. It's all.
sorry about that. Anything else, motion to adjourn?
So
Made,
moved.
seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you. Thank you.
How was it coming over the road? That state part of the road was lousy.